Hello, everyone. We're just waiting a moment for our stream to start on LinkedIn and then we'll kick things off. Hi, Marta.
Hello, hello.
So afternoon for me, but morning for Jacob. Where is everyone else calling in from? Okay, we're now live on LinkedIn too, so I think we will get started. So today is a collaborative webinar between Convert and Jacob from Good UI. We're going to be going through different types of test design. Now, this was advertised as 7 types, but we're aiming for 11. So there'll be lots to go through here. The other thing is, if you have specific questions about each of the test design types, we can stop along the way to answer your questions. So just put any questions in the chat and we'll make sure we get round to them. I'll hand over to Jacob to introduce the session today and himself.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Marcella. And yeah, hi, everybody. Today's talk will be about diversifying experimentation. So running broader, different, more diverse set of experiments. This is part of the content is from the Maven course, which I'm also running starting April 1st. So a little teaser here, of course. And yeah, the core premise of why diversifying experiments. So I think I don't think there's a best experiment out there that I'll show that's one superior to everything else. But there's a hunch, there's a feeling that when we diversify, when we run more, yeah, different types of experiments for different situations, I think we might be better off. And this is a feeling, just like in a toolbox, right? We have different tools for with different parameters, different strengths, different weaknesses for different jobs. So that's my intention here is to surface some of these. Some of these might be already you might be quite familiar with, but maybe some spawn some new ideas. All right. Um, Quick little intro or a quick little addition about myself. What I do? And over the years, I've been talking to numerous experimentation teams through coaching, through sharing of test ideas, and also talking experimentation. So that's one kind of critical area here. Some of you might also know me about from Good UI, where I publish experiments, and I'm also classically a UI designer, so experiment design. All right, first one. We ready? Pretty straightforward, the most basic setup, an isolated A/B test with a like a single change, right? Here we're right after causality. And maybe one property of something like this is, or a benefit is when we try to maximize agility, right? So we have this one little change here and simpler experiments, or sorry, simpler, when we have fewer variations, typically that also means lower samples, right? So that's kind of a speed gain. One benefit from just a simple variation sample calculation, right? Assuming our minimum detectable effect is fixed and is irrelevant or is fixed across all tests, right? So these tests need a little less sample. Perhaps another similar kind of point from where we obtain agility, the ability to kind of decide, have the test finished, of course, and make a decision, is that often these smaller, more simpler tests, they can be stacked. They can run concurrently, right? As opposed to being kind of right after sequence, like in a sequence right after another. So we get maybe faster decisions and more decisions. Okay, so that's the potential benefit on top of when we're kind of approaching a test in a reductionist way and we're after a single cause. Now, here's the little thing to watch out for. During these during these kind of isolated experiments, we often think again, it's an isolated test, it's a single variable, but it's one little warning or something to check for is if we're not confounding the experiment, because it's very, very easy to add other variables, maybe by unintentionally, or maybe we overlook something. As a simple idea here, let's say we're adding some copy on a product detail page, right? Free shipping, money back guarantee, pay monthly. When we start comparing that to a control, sometimes there's other things that enter the equation, right? Maybe search is affected. So maybe there's fewer searches because we add some additional elements. Maybe it gets attention away from something, or maybe additional copy gets added, or potentially sometimes we remove something because we replace something. We're like, oh, by the way, we also changed this and that. Or interestingly, we might also push and shove other important or less important elements which might have an effect. So all these things can interact, and that's something to always be conscious of and check. Okay. Any questions at this point? No questions. But yeah, feel free to ask as well in the chat, or I'll try and pause as well in between. Reverse experiment, quite similar to an isolated test. The simple difference is we remove maybe something that we're accustomed to, maybe a feature, maybe something we no longer think is beneficial, maybe want to save costs, so we get rid of something, right? Or we do a negative bet on something. Let's say we want to build a business case for a classic case speed optimization experiments. Maybe they're hard to accomplish, but maybe when we slow down, this is a classic Microsoft case study, right? Where we purposefully hurt ourselves or slow down a website in order to, again, build a business case for the value of speeding it up and attempt that. Okay. Fake door experiment, another little element that we can utilize during experimentation is minimizing effort. Right. So often we think, okay, let's do something perfectly. It's going to take forever. I mean, sorry, it's going to take a lot of effort, but we might want to cut corners in certain cases, right? Want to minimize effort to speed up and prove a case. And one example of something like that, an experiment published some years ago in Brazil, real estate, live agent. Okay, so imagine a lead generation for real estate. Someone's interested in looking for, book a home visit, or rent a room or something like that, right? And they want to see an agent in real life and see the house, right? And doing kind of a availability live agent indicator was considered a bit more work. So this was kind of like a fake it till you make it approach, right? Let's just kind of do a online and offline kind of state. And that's how the test was done, right? So a lot easier than actually, building out all the infrastructure and things like that, right? Another way of cutting corners, possibly related here, is sometimes, something I come across as well, sometimes taking photos, right? And real life could be, you have to hire a photographer, it takes a bit more effort. So if you have lots of products, hundreds of products, maybe sometimes we want to scope it out in a smaller section here, right? And first do it on a couple high traffic products. If that works, then we can do the rest, right? So building kind of cases gradually like that. Any other questions here, or?
Can't see any questions yet, but I just wanted to add is your examples there are very interesting because it's often one of great resistance with taking pictures or hiring people to satisfy a certain new feature that you want to give in the company, but testing it in that way allows you to make a case or otherwise for the actual need for that.
Right. So slicing and dicing into smaller chunks, right? And tackling it that way. Leap and compound experiments. One of my favorites here. Here we might want to maximize effect. So assuming we have some knowledge about maybe what works, what doesn't. Often these are done in early unoptimized states when there's a lot of upside, when there's like, you look at a page and then your team or yourself have like lots of historical data or lots of crowd-based kind of opinions, positive bets that, hey, we can probably do 5 changes, right? And we have evidence to support that these are probably good. And you could get away with, well, get away. That's there's an opportunity here to kind of cluster them together, compound them together into a single variant with the intent of these effects stacking on top of each other and becoming larger, right? So in visualizing this in another way, let's say we have 5 changes and some we don't know. We have no, like we have, right? Experimentation is perfect for tackling uncertainty, right? We might have no ideas whether it's good or bad, or we might have some which we feel are net negative, right? We think like, oh no, that change is going to hurt this, ourselves. So basically, we're just taking the net positive ideas, right? And we're stacking them together, leaving everything out into a single variant. And what we found is over the years, when we run these larger experiments, is the median's a little bit larger than classically. These are the 3.5% smaller experiments, more isolated classically, right? And these are the larger compound experiments. So with that, when the effect is larger, and this is also, by the way, this is not like bulletproof stuff. There's at least 20% that were negative as well. So for the record, it's not like a silver bullet approach, right? But yeah, the median effect was larger here. Interestingly, also Optimizely shared a year ago in their report something maybe similar to this. They reported on code complexity and the relationship with effect, magnitude of effect, and they found that when there's like larger changes, more complex tests, for some reason here the effect was larger. So that's one thing I was able to find. Be curious to kind of dig further deeper into this. But this is the stats behind it, right? So if we have larger effects, we need less sample to detect the signal there, right? So leap experiments could be faster. And on a sequential test as well, they would stop earlier as well, right? So that's one way of speeding up an experiment, maximizing the effect, and potentially, yeah, getting to an optimization faster than a series of smaller tests. Where do we get these probabilities from? Like, how do we know what typically works? And by the way, for the record, this is like often when these heuristics or practices are mentioned, there's almost an expectation that, yeah, they'll work, or they won't work for 100%. And of course, they won't work for 100% of the time, right? This is not a guarantee, but these are probabilities, right? And there's some data, for example, from Conversion.com, which we've analyzed together in terms of which kind of tests do better than not. So often test archive data from companies within their when they keep a track of historical tests, they drive higher test results, higher win rates, and the effect magnitude is also higher, as well as analytics. Interestingly, copying competitors also came up. So those contain also probabilities, as well as UX research and psychological studies. And maybe I'll pause here. There's a question.
Yes, Maddie asked, regarding leap and compound experiments, what is your perspective on doing multiple variants with different amounts of optimizations, e.g. control, and then variant 1 with 2 optimizations, and then variant 2 with the same 2 optimizations plus 1 more?
Perfect question, Maddie. And this is right about coming up in the next test setup. So we'll get to that. Thanks for asking. Couple slides about opinions as well. Again, the question being, going back to leap experiments, where do we get our probabilities from? And interestingly, opinions, especially crowdsourced opinions, when we have more people kind of averaging out our bets, there is an above random value there, right? So we can rely using opinions as a driver of weighing certain things, right? Just one example of our leap experiment, just to illustrate a visual from a year or two ago. So imagine a landing page with lots of changes here, right? 12 high probability changes, some being headlines, some being customer reviews, things we might even consider common sense to some degree, but they're all also backed by past experiments. Okay. Another thing, just showing more choices. It's another pattern that has shown some positivity, right, in the past. Multiple steps is another frequently with a very high win rate pattern, that breaking stuff into smaller chunks, not overwhelming people with like one big form, but just slicing the form into a stepped sequence. So anyhow, all these changes were clustered into a single variant. This is the actual result. It was replicated twice as well. So there's additional data, very similar data to this. Okay. And I'm not the only one that's doing this. I also observe sometimes what other retailers do. And there's plenty of examples where multiple changes are added in a single variant, potentially a leap. Okay. And to Maddie's question, multiple variants, right? So there's a couple awesome benefits when we do this, right? When we start adding additional variations at the cost of a little bit longer test, potentially, yes, there's a trade-off. But here's one situation where an ABC could shine. And imagine the scenario here. So at the top there is we just do an AB, right? And let's say that the B variant is significant and is accepted. Great. And then the B becomes the next B in the next control. Okay, so we do a second follow-up experiment, right? We roll out the B variant that just won. And now we're testing our amazing C variant. Okay, but maybe the C, this is just hypothetical, one out of many options, right? But let's say that in this case, the difference between our new variant is too small compared to the B variant. And maybe we don't have enough significance to reject a null. Okay, so maybe C doesn't make it through into a rollout, into production, because compared to B, it's not strong enough. Okay. But potentially if we do our ABC together and B and C are kind of in the same test setup, we might be in a position to actually take the most optimal, the highest effect at that point. So this is just one out of many scenarios where a C variant could not, right, potentially might not make it through. All right. Does that make sense? Another situation is sometimes our control, our A's, maybe are in a midpoint, right? Maybe we're kind of doing something a little bit like maybe a partial customer review or kind of any kind of implementation, but like in a mid state, in a kind of weak. It could be stronger, it could be weaker, right? So sometimes when we have these additional variations, we can actually do two opposing changes. One, like C variant here is strengthening the change and B is weakening. And I'll show one example of this. And then when we compare we don't have to compare the A and C or A and B. We can compare the C to B as a strong kind of hypothesis in itself. If that makes sense. Here's one example. Imagine coupon codes, right? Classic things, testing in some projects recently. And what if the control is kind of, again, in this mid state? So it's not really completely removed and it's not completely fully visible, but there's like a hyperlink to show it, right? So imagine it's a midpoint. Well, we can do B that gets rid of the coupon code altogether and C which completely makes it fully visible. Right? And then we can test the hypothesis of B and C as a no coupon versus yes coupon, kind of. All right. And potentially another trade-off to ABC or AB test. So in the first scenario, we have, again, the two tests separately, and we do an AB and then an AC after. And I wanted to illustrate that there are some efficiency gains. Sorry, this should be ABC, not ABB. There are some efficiency gains when we do sample calculations. Like there's a little bit less sample needed for our ABC test. All right, like 209,000 versus 231. But there is a trade-off to we actually get a potential decision. We are in a position to make a decision a little bit sooner, and we can make two decisions as opposed to one here. So there's some loss to agility, if that makes sense. Okay. Any questions on that? All right. Cascade experiments. It's very similar to like a ABC, or sorry, uh, a ABN, adding additional variations. But this one, we kind of stack the changes one after the other, right? So we introduce one change here to C, we kind of keep that change and we add another one. D inherits everything else and adds a third one. Okay, and this could be useful sometimes in isolation for isolating more variables, right? So imagine something like this, right? Let's say everybody loves button label tests, right? And we want to change the button label, right? Buy versus add to cart. Any prompts with this? Or is everything good? Right. So what's happening here is there's actually confounding. There's two changes in here. This is a button label change and a button size change. And a cascade could come in handy here because we could set it up in this way, right? So by, we can now, for our B variant, we can make the width wider, right? We have one change, a larger button, and we can compare that. And our C variant, we actually make the label change, and then the button size is fixed, right? So that's one way of how cascades could help us get rid of some confounding and make, yeah, more gradual changes. Intensity experiment, further talking about like, yeah, more variations, right? So this is another setup, is more of something better than not, right? Our, one testimonial good? Should we do three or four or five? Or should we increase pricing by, I don't know, free shipping at certain intervals, maybe at $10 or 20 or 30 or 40, right? Or pounds or right, right. Again, button tests, right? Netflix ran this intensity thing. Both were rejected, but essentially a single variable across variants, right? So the variable is the same. It's just the intensity increases, right? Or Amazon recently ran a sticky product navigation on their desktop pages, and they intensified like at which point would this navigation appear. And the B variant was at some point here after some scroll depth, and C it appeared further, and the C variant was accepted, right? So there could be different effects with as we intensify that change there. Any questions before exploratory experiments? Okay, exploration, right? So now we're going broad, kind of let's see what sticks. Potentially what, these are kind of experiments where they may or may not have a hypothesis, actually, and they're intended to kind of broaden our horizons, right? Try maybe crazier ideas, right? And they don't necessarily have to have a decisive outcome, but they can also be used to raise more questions and inspire 5 or 10 more experiments, right? So they're kind of blurring the lines. I see them as almost becoming kind of research-like, right? Where they're trying to inspire us by, yeah, by broadening some of the changes here, right? And maybe this is one way how we could visualize it, right? When we traditionally often run these problem driven solutions driven or business driven kind of goals experiments, and they're linked, they're rationalized, and that's great, right? And they're often tied to some evidence we have, whether it's user research or whether past historical experiments, right? And they often again attempt at scoring something desirable for a business, right? But maybe when we focus a little bit more, when we widen our exploratory kind of field of view, right? Maybe we increase the risk but maybe we can score something. Like, let's remember that when we explore, we can the spectrum here is that there could be some really awesome ideas in there. There could be also some really terrible ideas in there, right? But just trying to broaden that horizon there, right? So um, sometimes I don't know what the perfect ratio is, and maybe there could be different ratios of how many of these kind of explore versus exploit experiments we run, uh, for different situations. But sometimes in one poll, um, 20 versus 80 kind of came up as a as one potential answer. Um, Again, the poll here is very limited. It's four options, right? So they could be somewhat biased, but that came up as a maybe as a starting point, right? And there's many different ways of running these experiments as well, right? We could potentially so remember that the leap experiment was like really like high probable ideas. An exploratory leap is more like let's just change stuff and see if that opens something up, some doorways, right? Um, or maybe we can go really crazy with multiple variations, which are really, really distinct from one another, corresponding maybe to like spaghetti kind of testing, right? But maybe they'll break some ice and open up some opportunities down the road. And just for the record, this is not like, hey, everyone should do it this way and drop everything rational they're doing, but this is like probably like a small ingredient in their experimentation program, right? Um, and this is maybe one other thing kind of which comes to mind. Often we're very much, we have strict standards for to make decisions with these kind of experiment outcomes, right? We want to have significant tests, high quality tests, right? We want to have a strong signal to decide, but these just one more time, these exploratory experiments, we don't always have to have strong signals if we're framing them as something that will inspire another experiment, right? As long as it opens up our horizons, even weak signals we can take and we can do another test with them later down the road. Unity experiments, sometimes when we work on kind of, design stylistic or not just stylistic, but kind of sometimes what happens when we're working on smaller chunks of a website or product, maybe we trigger something on a smaller scale, or we work on a smaller scope. Uh, Sometimes I find that these kind of assets kind of go haywire, right? They break consistency, they go left and right. So that's my attempt at visualizing it here. And sometimes teams run these kind of unifying experiments where they're like, okay, maybe consistency is good. Maybe there's like less, maybe it's good to refactor some code, refactor some UI stuff, right? Reduce cost by not having like so many components. So a Unity experiment will be kind of, you could probably run it as a non-inferiority, do no harm experiment, and then just try and like make it consistent and see if it can get away with that. Holdout experiments. I can't say I ran an experiment like this, but I know that some teams do, where a smaller chunk of traffic is kept and for a longer period of time to see if there's seasonality or there's longer effects, if the effect maintains or if it deteriorates, if it decays over time. Essentially, will it work later? One key thing to watch out for is that there's a paper, Pitfalls of Long-Term Online Control Experiments. Watch out for cookie churn and sample pollution and survivorship bias, right? People can drop off, clear the cookies. People who have seen A could enter B, and it could get messy. So there's some recommendations how to do that, and just watch out for that. And one more little thing here. We're very much used to thinking of, the unit of randomization, like the human, right? The visitor or the visit. Like either a visit or a visitor, right? But these don't necessarily have to be a single individual. There could be cases, this may be a little bit more of an advanced situation, but there could be cases where there's like social features, like let's say chat, right? And you need two or more people to be able to use that chat feature. So in these cases, you could randomize by a group, sometimes a company, a pod. An example that comes to mind here is, I think it was Slack or something like that. Like imagine someone's in the same team or organization and one person gets a feature and someone else like next door, like next table down the road, right? Doesn't get it. It's like, oh, what's going on? How come you have it and I don't have it, right? So there could be that setup as well, just maybe that sparks something. I have 3 more sequences of some setups here that kind of could work together. Before I get there, any other questions?
I can't see any in the chat at the moment, but if anyone does have any questions, just leave them there.
Okay. So often we think of a single test, right? This is one test, this is another, but there could be some interesting creative approaches when we combine 2 tests together, right? Replication experiments is one example here, right? So when we finish running an experiment and we are surprised by the outcome, we actually can rerun that experiment. So that same experiment we can copy over, and then we can combine them, meta-analyze them together. Okay, there's a quick little poll here. Even when you have a significant outcome and we're feeling that there's something's odd with that test, okay, maybe there's some other indicating metrics that, hey, like they're showing something with maybe like an additional behavior metric, something it shouldn't, like this is too good to be true, right? And we can retest it, and that's completely valid. Okay, I've been working with Ron on this little heuristic. Here's his ideas of basically when to start replications. There's again one case we have a significant outcome, but we're feeling that something's odd. We're surprised. It's too good to be true or too bad to be true, right? Or even in cases where something's almost significant, we might believe that the experiment is underpowered. We can also rerun it or run it longer and then combine. So that's just, I wanted to put that out here. That's something we can, do. And typically meta-analysis just adds more power, right? So it has the potential, if the true effect is there, to make us be able to kind of detect that by increasing the sample. Doesn't always mean that outcomes will be significant, but it has the potential to do so. And just one more little thing here with when we're talking about rerunning certain tests, it's not about like, hey, I'll just pick one test or the other and whichever I like, because that's pure cherry picking, but it's about combining both outcomes. We built a little calculator here, goodui.org/meta, which you can use to combine multiple tests. Leap experiments and isolated. This comes up all the time. A question like, okay, but if we run 5 changes, what do we do? Like, how do we know which one works? Well, this one's about maximizing effect and shortening duration. And it's not exclusive, right? You can take, after running a leap, you can also like take change, like one particular change from that was tested in a cluster, and rerun it separately. So, doing it that way, right? And this is something, again, exploratory versus leap. So let's say we're testing something and might have low power. Maybe we'll have some insignificant results. But what if we run, take C and D shows promise. It's not significant, but we could take those as inspiration into a leap, combine them together, and maybe run that at a higher power and detect something. So another kind of idea for a setup of such, right? Using 2 experiments that work together to, one kind of sets up the probabilities, the other one takes it further. Okay, so that's from the course content. There's a lot more. Good UI, lots of A/B tests to inspire your own roadmaps with. And yeah, if there's any questions, I'd be glad to answer.
So we had one question over on LinkedIn, which is very broad, but so you may want to answer more than one. Somebody asked, what is the best book about experimentation written in English or any other resources?
Well, the 2 classic ones that come up that are kind of famous by Ron Kohavi and Georgy Gorgiev. Sorry, those are two separate books. Um, right? That's those are the two. More recently, Erin Weigel released a book, Designing for Impact. Um, that's off the top of my head, just popularity wise. Um, Hopefully that helps.
Yeah, Erin's book is great for kind of explaining more complex scenarios in simple, more accessible ways as well. I read that one recently too. Um, we had someone else commenting on LinkedIn that they've experienced the cluster experience with product types that are likely substitutes. Um, does anyone else over here on Zoom have any questions? Feel free to put those in the chat while we're waiting to see if there's any there. What is the date for your live cohort on Maven, the next one?
April 1st, and it's not a joke.
Yeah, just to make that clear, not an April Fool's. It is on April 1st. Let's see. It doesn't look like we have any other questions coming in at the moment. I thought this session was really interesting. You managed to get through quite a lot there in a short period of time. So we hit 11 rather than 7, but it's just interesting to broaden out, I guess, even if you don't have the traffic or the available resources to run all of these test types, even beginning to think about things beyond just A/B tests can help you to investigate what ones might fit better for you. So I thought it was a really interesting session. Thank you, Jacob.
Thank you so much, Marcella. And yeah, thanks everyone for chiming in here with questions and listening, and hopefully it inspires some more diverse experiments.
And this will be available to watch on LinkedIn afterwards, after we finish going live. So if you have any questions for Jacob about anything we talked about today, you can just leave them in the comments over there, and I'm sure he'll get back to you. Thank you very much. Have a nice day, everyone.